Okay, so yes, thank you everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here this time. This session, as you'll all see on the slides, hopefully is all about operationalizing data and unlocking its true value. So we're hoping for some really detailed discussions today on why data is so important in the industry and different ways to unlock value across your assets. So we've got two main hosts today. We've got Stuart Paterson, who is our brilliant head of customer impact at Utopi. He lives in the data. He also has a house, but he really does live in the data day to day. There's no better expert on how to unlock this value for our clients better than Stuart. And then he'll be handing over to our special guest, Linzzie Wallace from DLC Europe. Linzzie is an absolute legend. I'm sure most of you have heard of her, but she works really closely with us at DLC Europe. She's an asset and operations manager and an absolute expert on this stuff. So we're absolutely thrilled to have you here, Linzzie. Thank you. So they'll take you through some slides for about half an hour. And then today's session, we're actually going to go into some breakout rooms as well. We felt that it's a lot easier to have more valuable discussion in smaller breakout rooms. People usually feel a bit more comfortable asking questions and delving into a little bit more detail. Stuart will also be covering a case study from Mezzino, so it'll be a good chance for you guys to ask any questions. And those breakout rooms will be hosted by our very own Muir, Jose and Matt from Utopi. So any question's a good question, and they're your guys to be digging deeper with. I know breakout rooms aren't for everyone, but we really do urge you to stay on for those sessions so that you can ask any questions and try to get the most out of the session as possible. One final thing, there will be a Q&A chat throughout the session. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and after the breakout sessions, I will use that chat as a chance to pose any questions to Stuart or the team. If you come up with any other questions following the event, especially for Linzzie, please feel free to send them through to us. We'll share them with Linzzie and make sure that we can come back to you with any extra insights and intel that you might be needing. We'll also share with you the recording on YouTube as well. But a note on that, the breakout rooms won't be recorded for YouTube. So what happens in a breakout room stays in a breakout room. So without further ado, I'm really proud to hand over to Stuart Paterson. Stuart, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chanel. I feel as if I've probably been slightly oversold there, but thank you for that kind introduction. And yeah, thank you to everybody who's taken the time out to join this session. So as Chanel said, I'm head of customer impact here at Utopi, and I spend quite a lot of time with my team and our customers, kind of peeling the layers back in the data and understanding the stories that we see within that. I guess for the next kind of 15 minutes, I wanted really to discuss the importance of collecting, analysing and operationalising asset and portfolio performance data, and ultimately the impact that this can have on increasing net operating income, NOI, and asset valuation. Before I kind of chat through the case study, I thought it was worth providing just some context by sharing a kind of loose review process that we tend to go through with our customers at kind of key intervals throughout an academic year. In the UK, for example, this process might start at the end of heating season, for example. The environmental data that we collect from our multi-sensor and the energy consumption data that we collect allows us to essentially kind of benchmark assets against a portfolio or the wider industry. Typically the kind of type of data that we will review are things like temperature analysis and profiles, energy consumption and occupancy patterns, for example. With those data sets, we can also draw the correlation between the environmental data, which may highlight things like resident behaviour and the impact that has on energy consumption. What that then allows us to do, working with our kind of operating partners, is design interventions to optimise energy consumption. So the slide that's shared here is a kind of impact as a service or impactology. what we might do at the end of heating season in April, for example, is look to benchmark your assets, understand what's the kind of key drivers for energy consumption, and ultimately identify priority assets or assets where we effectively identify an opportunity for significant optimization. We then work with the operator to design those interventions to optimize energy consumption. Now, that could be anything from optimizing existing heating controls, the implementation of new technologies. The implementation would then typically happen before heating season starts. We would then look to potentially tweak or review those interventions, and then halfway through towards the back end of heating seasons, we would then look to track and measure the impact of those energy consumptions against the kind of original baseline that we would set against those assets. So I thought it was worth just highlighting that to provide a little bit of context to the kind of process behind some of the data analysis that we do. Chanel, if you could jump to the next slide, please, that would be great. Thanks. So the example that I wanted to share today is a case study that we have on Compass, which is a 290 studio PBSA asset in the heart of Birmingham, which is managed by Mezzino. Mezzino are an operator that we've worked with for a number of years, and we've got a really good positive working relationship with, and they were kind enough to allow us to discuss this case study today. After around a month after the installation of Utopi technology, a review of the environmental data with Mezzino and DLC Europe highlighted within this asset significant overheating. The average temperature within this asset was around 23.3 degrees. More importantly, 38% of studios had a daily average temperature higher than 24 degrees. Now, according to the UK Energy Saving Trust, anything over 24 degrees is classed as kind of overheated in the UK. There are factors such as external temperature, insulation, efficiency of existing heating seasons. However, energy required to increase the temperature in an average size PBSA studio from 21 to 24 degrees is typically anywhere between 20 and 30%, which is a significant amount, but it's certainly more significant when you then extrapolate that out across 290 studios in one asset. The existing panel heaters were identified as being a kind of older style binary heater, which effectively can be switched on and left indefinitely. Now, the behaviour that we tend to see within the data with systems like this is that residents tend to leave the panel heater on and then use the window, for example, to regulate temperature. And it's purely the residents not understanding the impact that their behaviour then has on energy consumption. What that also makes it really difficult to do is derive a direct correlation between internal temperature and energy consumption when you have factors like windows being open to regulate temperature. But if we look at the table in the bottom right hand corner here in column A, we can see that the average studio in this asset at this time was consuming 11.2 kilowatt hours a day. Just to put that into context, the UK average is less than half of that at 5.4 kilowatt hours a day. So based on this information and the review process that we went through, DLC Europe advised to install smart panel heaters with boost functionality across this asset to help control usage. Now, if we look at the middle column B, the smart panel with booster highlighted there, we can see that there was a significant positive impact that this intervention design actually had. It reduced the average site temperature from 23.3 degrees down to 22.6. However, the percentage of rooms above 24 degrees only reduced from 38 to 31, and actually that's where we see a lot of excessive energy use. However, the average electricity consumption per apartment did drop significantly from 11.2 to 6.3 kilowatt hours. So it's a really positive story to be told there. This design change did present some challenges. The new technology that was installed with factory settings, which basically means the max temperature set point of the heaters was 30 degrees with a boost functionality for 2 hours. A typical UK studio, PBSA studio in the UK, based on its size, will take between 20 minutes and 60 minutes to get to 21 degrees in a typical heating season month. So we know that that's quite an aggressive setting to have. Any changes to these devices had to be made manually. Unfortunately, there was no centralized control. If we think about 5 minutes across 290 devices, that's typically a 3 to 4 day exercise for the site teams. For the operators amongst us, I think we're all in agreement that taking ops teams and facilities people out for 3 days to manually configure devices is just a task that's unlikely to happen. Unfortunately, these new devices also overloaded the Wi-Fi network, which in turn impacted resident experience. Through the next cycle of data analysis that we did, we were able to identify an opportunity to further reduce consumption and ultimately then unlock additional kind of marginal gains in performance and energy efficiency. The recommendation here was to install a technology that Utopi have developed as part of our energy control solution. So rather than go to the expense of replacing the now new panel heaters, we were able to essentially just replace the module or the brain of the panel heater or the firmware. That was low cost, and the install times for that are very similar, just to reconfiguring the device itself. So just on paper, that was a bit of a no-brainer based on the marginal gains that we thought we would get. The benefit of this technology is that it has centralized site-wide control through a single platform, which has a simple and easy to use interface. We also have created the ability to manage exception profiles on a per bed or per studio basis with selected end dates. So, at the end of heating season, for example, the whole system will just reset back to site-wide configuration. These exception profiles also ensure that residents from warmer climates, for example, are comfortable within their home without having to increase the max set point of, the whole asset. We have also integrated this technology with the Utopi multi-sensor, and we've developed a step-down functionality, which essentially reads off our PIR sensor. So when there's no motion detected in a room, the system will just automatically step down and switch the heater off immediately. Again, saving energy consumption and optimizing energy use. And then the other thing that we've built, and this was great feedback from the operators that we work with, was a level of authorization control. So any changes that you make to site-wide settings that significantly impact energy consumption and NOI should be ultimately considered a business decision, and not everybody should have the ability to make those changes without understanding the kind of wider implications. Chanel, if you could move to the next slide, please, that would be lovely. Thank you. This is a more kind of visual representation, excuse me, of the kind of three stages that we went through with Compass. If we look at the bottom graph, what we have here is a distribution of temperature bell curve. The red distribution curve is the original starting point. The green distribution curve in the middle is the installation of the upgraded panel heaters with boost, and then the blue distribution of bell curve is the installation of the smart Utopi tech. We can see that in all instances that bell curve was shift to the left, which is great, which shows a reduction in average site temperature, which will then have an impact on overall energy consumption. But where we've seen a really significant reduction is the percentage of rooms above 24 degrees, where we see that significant energy waste. And if we look at the top graph, the blue trend line at the top is internal average temperature, and we can see that trend line is continually coming down based on the interventions that we put in place. And the purple horizontal dotted line is average energy consumption, and we can see that the stages that's dropped to. But we can see that those changes over that timeline are not only significant, but they're sustainable. So the impact that the kind of final intervention that we put in place had was that it reduced average site temperature from 22.6 degrees down to 21.8. And with those exception profiles, it didn't have an impact on resident satisfaction or resident comfort, which was great. The percentage of rooms that had a daily average temperature over 24 degrees reduced significantly from 31% down to 8%. And the average daily kilowatt hour consumption reduced from 6.3 down to 4.9. Overall, that's a greater than 50% reduction from the starting point, and now less than the UK studio average of 5.4 kilowatt hours a day. So I guess that probably raises the kind of, well, so what question? Could you pop to the next slide, Chanel? Perfect. That stutter was just, you knew what was coming. So where we see a significant and sustained energy reduction, this should then ultimately result in a review to reduce operating budget. Accurate data and insights support accurate forecasting, and updated budgets based on lower energy costs ultimately demonstrate well-managed assets. Lower operating expenses increase NOI, which is a key driver in asset valuation, particularly with most PBSA assets valued using an income approach, the cap rate method, where NOI is divided by the cap rate. So using the example above, if we consider higher asset valuation based on an NOI uplift, that might look like if the previous energy consumption, for example, or previous energy costs were 500k, following the design intervention and implementation of change, that new energy cost is 450k. That's an NOI increase of 50k at a cap rate of 5%, for example. This would be an increase in the valuation of that asset by around £1 million. So the question is, well then, so what? That can then support better financing terms, access to greener funds. It will create a stronger ESG profile, but will also give buyers confidence at exit. Now, it's just worth highlighting and identifying these opportunities and carrying out these interventions. There are things that we do need to consider. One is ensure accurate metering and post-installation measurement that is in place to validate any of these interventions. We need to work these savings into our P&L models and valuations, but from my standpoint, more importantly, we need to maintain and update documentation of these upgrades and interventions and measure the impact that they have. If we think that 40% of greenhouse gases come from the real estate sector, it's ultimately our responsibility to run these assets as efficiently as we possibly can. Case studies like this show and highlight that marginal gains can significantly increase NOI, asset valuations, but more importantly, they can help us create more sustainable communities. So with that, I think I've probably taken my allotted time of 15 minutes, Chanel. Please do praise me for keeping in time. But with that, I'd like to hand over to Lindszie from DLC to kind of reinforce the importance of this from a kind of wider industry standpoint. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everybody. I can see some friendly faces on here, which is nice to see. Just to give a brief introduction, my name's Linz. I work for DLC as the Asset and Operations Manager. I've sat here since November. Before that, I was at CA Ventures for 4.5 years. Very data driven, and utilities is my passion. So for me, this kind of slots in really well. I'm going to try and keep it quite short and sweet today, but feel free to reach out if you do have any questions, and to Chanel or I, we're more than happy to assist where we can. So just touching on ESG transparency. So what we're finding now is GRES participation is now expected rather than being optional for institutional investors, pension funds, etc. And I believe it's over 150 institutional investors that are representing equity at the moment use GRES scores in their investment decisions. So it's quite a beefy number. And pension funds with strong GRESB scores typically benefit from preferred financing. So that's your green loans, sustainable linked loans. And what we're seeing now is lenders now require more auditable high frequency data rather than just an EPC, for example. So where we can validate that and provide that is really helpful. And having that raw, reliable data can help attribute to those green loans. So as I just mentioned, the data points captured and validated through systems such as Utopi can empower funds and the operators to provide the auditable high quality evidence that carries, as we know, significant weight across many ESG frameworks, GRESB and BREEAM, etc. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we've seen in today's market, so where ESG performance is increasingly tied to financial value, as Stuart just mentioned, data-backed evidence is probably now the most powerful defense against valuation challenges. So high quality data not only strengthens the credibility of sustainability claims, but it also reinforces underwriting assumptions, which can often minimize the risk of price chipping. It also ensures smoother due diligence during a transaction, and we're seeing that now time and time again. What we've been able to see through using Utopi is them provide the transparency and the audit trails necessary to de-risk these challenges and ultimately uphold asset value, especially in a market where ESG scrutiny and building setups are intensifying. And I'm sure many of you on this call are seeing that in your work streams also. This is, I would say, probably particularly visible in asset classes like PBSA and BTR, where reoccurring income linked to operational performance and future capex exposure can be flagged through trends and consumptions. Again, similar to how Stuart just mentioned a minute ago. Next slide, please. I'm trying to keep this really sort of to the point here because I know everyone's time is precious. So where has it worked well? In PBSA, we've used Utopi to identify the heating system inefficiencies, and where we have seen these inefficiencies, we've been able to rectify and improve, more importantly, with a sensible ROI, and reporting that back up to funds and owners is critical. The biggest thing is what's the capex cost, what's the ROI, sign off and get it implemented. And again, we're seeing that time and time again. ROI is the biggest key for us. Additionally, Utopi has enabled us to have targeted interventions without compromising resident comfort. Now, for me, this is one I'm really big on. Ultimately, from an operator, from a landlord standpoint, these residents living, doesn't matter if it's PBSA, BTR or co-living, they're paying rent to live in these schemes. We do not want to compromise their living experience. And particularly in PBSA, operators want to maintain a high GSLI score. They want to ensure that rebookers are not affected, and particularly in asset classes where demographic can vary and the markets can be often challenging, which we are seeing at the moment. In BTR, we've been able to monitor overventilation in communal areas. Again, particularly important in landlord domains where the cost sits with the landlord rather than the resident. So this is something that we're really hot on at the moment. And often these areas have the spotlight shone on the most. And Stuart, I'm not sure if you maybe want to touch upon that shortly as well, maybe during the breakout areas. We've been able to adjust HVAC controls based on actual usage patterns, so reducing energy waste, again, a big one. We want to try and minimize that as much as possible. With things working well, often comes a small downside, and I think it's important to highlight this. Having site team engagement is critical to the success of Utopi. When site teams aren't fully engaged or haven't been onboarded properly with a top-down management, the data doesn't get fully utilised, and ultimately we want to be able to utilise that data to the best we can. And so therefore engagement and ownership at property level is critical for the success. We've also found data overload. Too much raw data can overwhelm site teams, particularly when they have various other challenges on site in their day-to-day roles, such as debt chasing, lease up, etc. And they also have different busy periods of the year. Heating season for Utopi is very busy, but they have other constraints within their day-to-days. So we found that, particularly from my experience, we have found having the site teams engaged and feel part of the journey, there will be the most benefit. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just to close it off, really, what value have we seen in the data? So real-time high-frequency reporting is key. Access to live data enables immediate reporting, and rather than waiting to report on the next quarter, what we have seen firsthand is how funds will typically want to see how their assets are performing month on month, year on year by comparison at any one time. For example, if the assets are regressing, why this is, allowing time for rectification or improving. If assets are performing well, what's good about that is the asset owner would like to understand what campaigns have been run. Can they duplicate that against different asset classes or various other portfolios, for example? It's scalable across portfolios, so it works with, as I mentioned, different asset types, PBSA, BTR, co-living, and this provides a unified view of ESG performance at both asset level and portfolio levels, which is key for the funds. Can bridge the gap between divisions such as operations, ESG, finance, and then it's consistent across different asset classes. So whether it's a 1,000-bed PBSA or a 200-bed unit BTR scheme or growing co-living portfolio, for example, the principle will always remain the same. The data just allows the operators and owners to make those strategic decisions and intervene where they need to. And it allows the operators to optimize the performance of the asset and future-proof it when the asset is due to exit a portfolio, for example. So the key takeaway for me is the data, doesn't matter how big the asset is the most important thing. That's it from me. But as I said, reach out with any questions. Be more than happy to sit down and help where you need me to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lindszie. That's really, really helpful insights. And thank you, Stuart. I will call out both of your great timekeeping. So much appreciated. Stuart, do you want to cover now what Lindszie had mentioned just before we go into the breakout rooms? So how data can kind of help clients uncover that energy waste in unoccupied spaces, both in the BTR context, but also other asset classes?
Yeah, we can do that, no problem. So what the data gives us is kind of real-time kind of dynamic insights into space performance. We have the energy data, so we understand the energy performance related to a space or a cluster, for example. But we also then have occupancy data. Those two data sets allow us to understand resident behaviour, because that's ultimately what, in a lot of cases, what this comes down to. So if we think about the two different sectors that we've got, if we look at BTR, for example, where it's where the resident pays all the utility bills versus PBSA, where it's an all-inclusive model. In BTR, for example, if a resident doesn't understand how to manage or control the heating system effectively within their home, they might leave, for example, over Christmas for a 2-week period and come back and have got excessive bills because the heating has still been on, for example. The data that we can produce can identify that and allow us to then work with the operator to then step in and either create an intervention or a campaign. And that might just be something as simple as sending out comms to the resident about how they best manage their heating when they leave to go on holiday. In the PBSA sector, it might be that actually because of the type of billing model that it is, it's an all-encompassing model, that actually the controls might be a better way to manage heating in unoccupied spaces, for example. But things like, and Lindszie touched on this earlier on, that resident engagement piece, that educational piece is really important. From a change of behaviours programme that we ran a couple of years ago, what we realised was 80% of residents in a PBSA assets, they're hyper aware of climate change, but the thing they don't understand is the impact that their behaviour has on energy consumption and ultimately the environment itself. So being able to take customers along on that journey with education is really important, and that helps you get buy-in. So depending on the situation, there are a number of kind of, you know, interventions or processes that you might put in place, but like Lindsay said, they're all generally scalable and kind of cross into each sector. So hopefully that helps answer that in a little bit more detail.
It does. Thank you so much, Stuart.